It's still setting up to go onto YouTube Live. I'll let you know.
Mine
It
says
says
webinar.
it's streaming live on the screen.
That's what it
It
says to
just
me.
it just went on. Okay, we can proceed.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm calling to order the Common Council Ordinance Committee regular meeting today, December 19th, 2023 at 7:03. And I'll just note the roll call. Nora Nadusky-Eitner, Johan Lopez, Josh Goldstein, Melissa Murray, Yalen Seed, and Lisa Shanahan are all here. We expect Heather Dunn to join us later, and we'll note it in the minutes when she does. Brian, is there anybody here who wants to speak for public comment? We have no public hearing tonight.
So right now we have one attendee, which is Stuart Wells. Stuart, if you want to speak, could you raise your hand? We'll give Stuart a second to see if he wants to say anything.
Great.
While we're waiting, welcome back, Lisa and Josh, and welcome Melissa, Jalen, and Johan, and welcome back Nora as well. And I guess we're waiting for. Oh, he raised his hand. Okay, Stuart, 1 second. I'm going to allow you to talk. Okay, Stuart.
Yeah, you guys were going to be talking about redistricting, and I was available if you have questions about how that would be accomplished in a practical sense. Otherwise, I don't have any specific comments.
That's
Thank you,
very
Stuart.
generous of you to join us, and that would be helpful. It may
Yep.
be that we have questions. So why don't we leave Stuart as a panelist?
Yeah, I'm gonna leave him up. And I'm just gonna see if I can lower his hand. Nope, or just leave him up. And when we get to that, we'll just let Steve and Stuart provide any information that we have to the committee.
That would be great. So yes, it's great that Brian introduced and welcomed our new members, as do I. So thank you all for being part of this new formulated committee. The next thing that we'll do is the acceptance of minutes for October 30th, 2023. Do I have a motion to accept the minutes as they are filed? Thank you, Nora. That would be great. Does anybody have any changes that they'd like to suggest? Nora, do you have any changes? It's the two of us who attended the meeting.
Nope, I think I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, good. So all in favor of accepting the minutes of October 30, 2023, the special meeting of the Ordinance Committee, raise their hands in affirming?
I.
Me and Nora. Great. I understand that other people will be abstaining. I think everybody else will be abstaining.
Well, Johan, Melissa, the new people aren't, but I don't think they
They
can.
can abstain as well, yeah. Great. So that is passed. The next piece of business is discussing Chapter 58A, which is the blight prevention ordinance. And I'm going to have Brian go through the draft that we shared with all of you in the agenda. Thank
So
you,
I'll
Brian.
put it up on the screen too, so everyone can see it. All right, so the blight ordinance has been in effect since 2015, and the powers for blight come from general statutes, Connecticut general statutes. And since then, there have been minimal amendments to this. And so recently, the legislature approved amendments to blight, specifically concerning the amount that can be fined to people whose properties are found to be blighted. And you'll see those. Bear with me, I'm just trying to find it. You'll see those in section 58A-4. Warnings, citations, hearings, and fines. Not everything that's in there in blue is new. There is some stuff that isn't in blue that's new. And that's why I also attached the current ordinance, blight ordinance that's in effect, and you can compare them. They're not too long, but the changes that you see in 58.4 have to do with the numerical value for violations. And some of the other changes you'll see in blue as we go through it briefly. While we were making changes to blight as it pertains to the fines, it was brought to our attention that perhaps the definitions of what constitutes blight should be updated. And so we took a look at, and again, this is a very rough draft, and we're looking for everyone's comments, but we looked at other municipalities in the area Stanford, for example, and Bridgeport were two that we took a look at. And you'll see that the definitions, as I scroll through them, 58A1, the definitions are where you'll see a majority of the proposed revisions, or at least, revisions that we want everyone to take a look at and think about and contemplate. This is basically, the definitions is where you're going to find what Norwalk will eventually agree upon through the Ordinance Committee and Common Council as to what type of property is a blighted property. And we also are trying to update the blight prevention officer by not just leaving it to the chief building official. We also want his or her or their designee, so that we're not just relying on one person. And then something that's been mentioned a few times are people that would be able to be exempt or at least obtain assistance if their property is blighted. And you'll see that at the bottom of the definition section: disabled individuals, elderly individuals, and low-income individuals. Typically, the process, as I understand it, is with those people, if there is a blighted property and they're blighted, they can then come to the blight official and advise them that they meet the definitional requirement of one of those three. And then they can work with the blight official to obtain assistance in remedying the proposed violations. And then another proposed change is property maintenance violation. And again, I'm more than happy to share with any member of the Ordinance Committee the ordinances from Stanford or Bridgeport, which I think are, pretty comprehensive. So you can take a look at what it is that Stanford and Bridgeport were doing, and take a look at what Norwalk is proposing. And it might also, spur some ideas in your own mind about what should or should not be there. Many of the other sections, if you don't see blue, please compare them. But many of the other sections, besides 58A3, many of the other sections either have minimal changes or no changes. So one question that I was asked about was, and sorry to jump around, but 58A3 talks about people asking for an exemption if you have like an open meadow or something along those lines, and you're not negatively affecting someone else's property, i.e. blocking the right of way or obstructing a walking path or something on those lines. But you'll see that in there. One section that was not touched was the process by which somebody goes through once they're blighted. That's controlled by 77-152C, which is a general statute. And there's a process by which somebody's blighted, the blight enforcement officer takes it in front of a magistrate, and that magistrate will make a ruling, and that ruling would be binding pending an appeal. And a lot of the changes were not, there weren't many other changes besides really the definitional section and the numerical fine value. And so I guess it's something that is being talked about more and more, the impact of blight. And so this is something that was brought to Ordinance Committee's attention. So we tried to go through a draft ourselves and try to come up with some recommended revisions. But again, this is just an initial step. We're not voting on anything tonight. This is just so everyone gets a chance to see what it currently looks like and where we might be going with it for everyone's consideration here.
Right. And basically, we were getting a lot of, for those of you who are returning council people, a lot of us were getting many complaints about blighted properties in our districts. And so we felt as though when we looked at the definitions of blighted property, it was pretty limited and it didn't really address all of the situations that we've been handling. So we thought it was a good time to take a good look at it. And then with the meadow situation, certainly for my district, there's a lot of people who actually do have meadows. And we saw that, I think it was Stanford also had this section about meadows. So we thought it was a good time to incorporate something like that, where somebody has an intentional desire to add a meadow, such as, as we described in that.
Lisa, we have Heather. Heather's
Oh,
here.
good.
I'm trying
Hi,
to promote
Heather.
her to panelist.
Oh, great.
I just
Oh,
brought
just,
her over.
oh, good.
So welcome Heather to Ordinance Committee.
Yeah, we're sorry that you missed the little presentation we're doing on blighted properties. Just to update you really quickly, the reason why we're looking at the blighted property ordinances for two reasons. One was all of the fines changed pursuant to state law, so we had to update it in any event. And then because we were updating it anyway, we never like to just do a little tiny look. We might as well, if there's other changes needed to be made, this is the time to do it. We decided that the definitions of blighted property were insufficient, that we could broaden them and make them more fulsome for the experiences we've been having in different districts. So this is a first draft. We're encouraging all of the committee members to get a chance to take a look at it over the next couple of weeks. And then I'll be reaching out to everybody. It's a little hard to draft an ordinance on TV such as we are. So I'll be trying to get feedback that we can share and then all come back together again in January and really dive into this ordinance at that time.
I will also provide, everyone has a copy of the agenda, which has the current ordinance and the proposed revisions that we were showing you here. What I'm also going to do is I will send everyone an email of a Word email, a Word format of the proposed revisions, so you can tinker with it or make any, draft your own thoughts on it and then get back to Lisa.
Yeah, try not to tinker too much. Try to take notes, like put notes in it, but tinkering the language can be really confusing to try to put 7 tinkerings together. So take good notes on that. And then does anybody have any questions right now for either Brian or Jessica Vonacek, who also joined us? She was part of the drafting session about some of the things we put into this draft. Looks like Nora has a question. And yeah, she is muted. For some reason, I'm not hearing Nora. Is anybody else?
I am not hearing Nora.
Nora, I
How's
think
that?
oh, there you are. There
That's
you go.
fine.
There I am. Yeah, sorry about that. Just very quickly, one thing, and we don't need to discuss tonight, but I just wanted to flag, because I may follow up with you, Lisa and Jess. I know that one of the other sources of complaint we get a lot of is businesses, and we do want to support businesses, particularly local businesses that are providing local jobs, but businesses that are nonetheless not maintaining their properties properly, that are not. And so I'm just flagging that as something I'm going to be looking at and trying to think through. I'm really thrilled that we have the support for our low income, our seniors, our disabled, but I think we may also want to think through what we can do to both expect better of our business community and also help them in meeting those obligations. Because it is, I think, certainly an area where I hear a lot of complaints, but also recognize that we want to, and just is something I flagged just before. So I think it's a conversation to have ongoing.
That's a great point. Jess, do you want to say anything to that end with that regard to how our first draft looks?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you. I think, this is really timely because we are starting to put additional resources into our neighborhood improvement team. And, it's something that we announced in early November. We're bringing an additional blight inspector on board. We're also bringing an additional deputy zoning inspector on board. We just did interviews for a neighborhood improvement manager, and we revamped that job description. And as part of the November announcement of the neighborhood improvement team, we talked about being able to commit to attending community meetings, district meetings, and actually having that neighborhood improvement manager be a conduit between City Hall and all of the community groups that are out there, being a face, being able to brand it in a meaningful way, being able to have that voice where the community can pick up the phone and reach out. And I think part of that is not only neighborhood improvement when it comes to building and code enforcement, but also planning and zoning and some of the DPW and a lot of the businesses that you're talking about, Nora. And so being able to really have a face to a name to pick up a phone and call. And we're really excited about those efforts. So I think the timeliness of being able to update blight, not only with the fines that came through on the state statute, but also thinking about the definition of blight really supports the neighborhood improvement team and being able to have the blight inspectors and the deputy zoning inspectors go out and be able to identify blight. We've also worked really closely with the legal department in order to be able to understand sort of what the process looks like and being able to meet those statutory requirements in order to be able to get blight processed in a certain way. Sorry, Lisa, I'm really excited about this. So I just happened to talk a lot about it.
No, bring everybody up to speed. We've already spent, hours on this together. So people should know.
Yeah,
it.
no, it's a really exciting moment in time, I think, for the city, because we've heard a lot about different businesses and how they've been an eyesore, and how, the South Norwalk School is coming in and talking about kind of the way that mobility and connectivity is coming together. But the other thing that we've done is we actually created a compliance committee in the city, and the compliance committee meets once a month. It's all of the departments that do violations, whether it be planning and zoning, health department, building and code enforcement. We also have police and fire in there. And we actually go through a list of different properties that we've identified as problem properties in the city, where maybe multiple departments have created violations, and we all work together with the legal department to be able to figure that out. So, I think that that's also a really exciting thing for us to be able to do. But, we're really grateful for you as the ordinance committee to be able to look at the ordinance, because it really gives us a stronger tool in order to be able to enforce. And part of the enforcement is being able to educate the community on what a blight violation is and what a zoning violation is, and being able to really connect with the community in a meaningful way with language that they can understand and identify with. And I think that that does all of the ordinance that you see in front of you is drafted to be able to do all of that. So, probably way too much, Lisa, but you open it up and there you go. But really exciting stuff here, and really grateful for all of your work on this.
Great. Well, I figured you made all the trouble to come to the meeting, so we should hear from you. So it's all good. So that's pretty much where we are, unless anybody has a further question, and then we're going to move on to our next agenda item. Any other questions with regard to blight? No, I see none. So let's move forward to introduce Steve Mendek. Nora, do you want to, kind of introduce this? Because this really, in some ways, is one of your babies.
Sure, I'm happy to. So, as all of you know, we revised the city's charter last year. I'm, endless gratitude to the Charter Revision Commission that did just tremendous work on that, with the assistance of Steve Mednick, our attorney. And one of the things that's going to now be happening over the course of this year, and probably next year too, is updating ordinances to be in line with the new charter. And one of the very first things that needs to be done in relation to that, one of the things that we put into the charter was redistricting our council districts A through E. We are required to do so under state statute. As all of you probably know, there is a general requirement in the United States, sort of a basic constitutional principle that everyone should have an equal vote, which means that district sizes need to be roughly equal in order to have each person's vote carry a sort of approximately equal weight. And that has not been done in Norwalk in a good long time. So because, as I think Stuart's presence references, this is a complicated process that is going to have sort of a waterfall of effects. We need to develop the process by which we're going to do the redistricting, and then we need to do the redistricting, and then we need to give Stuart and the other registrars and voter staff and everyone who's sort of involved in the actual process of getting voting done substantial time to actually implement these changes. And we need voters to have time to understand, there will be potentially some shifts in boundary lines. People may be moving from district to district. So all the way around, this is sort of a very important thing to move as quickly as possible, but as effectively as possible, to implement this, sort of, again, basic kind of fundamental constitutional principle. And so I will leave it to Steve, who I think can give a lot more background about sort of what is required under our new charter, and what sort of some of our options are for proceeding with this.
Thank you, Nora. No, go ahead, Steve. I was going to say thank you, Nora, and you take over it's your turn.
Thank you,
Steve.
Madam Majority Leader, Madam Chair. It's good to see everybody. I'm also happy to see Brian. Brian and I, Candela, you're very lucky to have Brian as your assigned attorney. I was very lucky that Mario had asked me to work with Brian in the charter process. He was enormously helpful to me, being the outsider. It was very good to have somebody on the inside who really was able to keep me from making any significant mistakes during the process. So I greatly appreciate Brian's presence, and look forward to working with you. As the majority leader pointed out, you're going to see a lot of me, I think, in the next few months. And the first item of business that we're going to really need to delve into and really come to grips with is the issue of redistricting. Section 3-4A3 of the charter requires periodic revision of the Common Council district boundaries, reapportionment. And one of the methods to the madness of the Charter Commission was we had a massive undertaking to reorganize the charter from what it was to what it is now, and what it is with the revisions. And so there was a very concerted decision not to tackle difficult issues, hard issues. As Nora knows, the majority leader knows, we avoided most of those issues, and that's why you're going to have another charter revision in 2025 to deal with some of the structural issues and some of the issues where there may be a little more tension than there was in the last process. But it was really critical to end up with a clean, workable, modern 21st century document. And I like to think that that's what you ended up with. But one of the issues we needed to tackle, even though it was not talked about a lot, it was in our notes, it was in our findings, and it was in our explanatory text, so the voters understood that this was one of the items that they were voting on, was this concept of reapportionment. To my knowledge, I think the districts have basically been in place since the charter was adopted, or maybe through one of the reforms during the course of charter revision over the years. But certainly Norwalk has not operated under the Baker versus Carr. All the lawyers on the committee will remember that from law school. That was the case, the one person, one vote. They used to call it the one man, one vote. That's the one person, one vote approach to the to districting. And you know, and what it is it really requires local governments. It requires it requires the legislature to establish congressional redistricting, legislative redistricting, which is what the General Assembly does, both of those components. And then ultimately, the local governments are responsible for local redistricting. And so if you have districts, you need to redistrict periodically. Historically, the reason for that is if you, some of you probably don't go back as far as I do, but in the era before home rule, when I was in elementary school in Waterbury, Connecticut, we had a lot of legislators. We had legislators from just about every town had a legislator. It goes back to colonial times where almost every town had representation in the House of Representatives in Hartford. And as cities grew, and metropolitan areas grew, suburban areas grew throughout the country, not just Connecticut, but throughout the country, it became apparent that representation was quite skewed. And that's what led to Baker versus Carr, that took it away from geographical boundaries or municipal boundaries or county boundaries to a concept of balanced boundaries for these districts. And so we at the local level are required to address that issue. I won't get into all the particulars of it. We don't need to, because we have no choice. We have got to do this. And it's something we have not done. The objective of redistricting, obviously, is to the extent you can, and there's a little more flexibility at the local level, but the objective is equal population balance. Districts in a community should be very close to the same population. You should not have one district that has twice as many voters as another district. And we'll talk about this in a minute, but there are organizations, there are companies that you'll have to probably do an RFP for that will do the computer statistical work that will be necessary to do this. You also want to make sure you're complying with the Voting Rights Act. Those provisions of the Voting Rights Act are still applicable, have not been undermined by the Supreme Court. I'm sorry, undermined is not the right word. Whatever the Supreme Court thinks they did to the Voting Rights Act. You cannot block minority groups from electing candidates of choice. You need to have districts that reflect the population of the immediate area. You want to try to have communities of interest kept together if possible. There should be contiguity. Each district should be one connected entity. You probably have seen, in fact, the New Haven Board of Alders, when I was on it, had what I called a slithering snake district, because there were a number of alders that were living within the vicinity of each other, and I was one of them. And to save one of them, they had to create a slithering little district up Whaley Avenue in New Haven to accommodate that particular member of the Board of Alders. Kind of violated that principle, but no one ever challenged it. But the objective is contiguity. You want to make sure that you have that. You also want to make sure there's compactness, that districts' shape should be reasonable. You shouldn't see a snake in the city of Norwalk. North Carolina is very famous for its snake districts as well, where they try to retain white population districts by creating districts where they take Black populations from different parts of the state and create one Black district that has no contiguity at all, that goes all the way through the state. So they preserve these other districts. They've faced enormous legal problems there, but the objectives are equal population, VRA, Voting Rights Act compliance, community of interest, contiguity, and compactness. Those are the objectives. That's what we have to try to achieve. That's achieved. And we're talking about the end of the process now, because I'm going to talk about the work you're going to be doing is the heavy work at the beginning of the first heavy project at the beginning of the process. But that work is done by a committee that we're going to have to create. Again, that's the ordinance we're going to be looking at. And that committee would then be responsible for adopting a plan which would ultimately be approved by you as the Common Council. And so the objective is that we need to get an ordinance in place. And I'm glad to see that the registrar is here, that Stuart is here, because he's one of the people that we need to talk to as we put this process, and probably should be on a reapportionment committee because of the role that is played by the registrars in this process. And so we need to create this committee as quickly as possible, because the objective is, if we're aiming for the election in 2025 for the new districts to be in place, I will talk to the Secretary of State's office and get a precise date as we go through this process. But I think that you really need to have these districts pretty close to in place by the end of this year, the beginning of next year, before the nomination processes are to begin, and also to leave a little breathing room for possible litigation. You never know what's going to happen with respect to any interests that may be unhappy about where the districts go in the course of your deliberations. So one of the issues that the commission punted was the vehicle for dealing with redistricting. If you look at some of the other charters, and we talked about this at the Charter Commission, you will see that the charter commissions are baked into the charter themselves. And one of my recommendations as we go to the 2025 charter process, if we like what we've created by ordinance, we should probably graft it into the charter so that it's institutionalized and it can't be changed if we think it's worked well. And I think that's the real key issue. And so we need to create a commission and we need to create a process. And that's what the ordinance is going to do. And the commission shouldn't be a huge commission. What I will do when we start this process, and I know that I have a meeting coming up. I think the chair is going to be part of that meeting. We need to kind of figure out how this will be drafted and what the pieces of the pie are going to be, or the puzzle are going to be. And so basically you set up a process where a commission will be created. In Hamden, they have a 7-member commission. Hamden's a little smaller than you are. New Haven has a 15-member commission, which is they have a 30-member board of alders as well. So it's a little big. Bridgeport has a 9-member, 9-member commission, 12-member commission as well. And we'll talk about that, about who should be on it, how that should be comprised. My personal feeling is the registrar should either be members or ex officio members, and they should be very much a part of the process. They should be, they know the city well, they know the areas of the city well, and while they may not have all the census data immediately available to them and all the analytics that go into the constitution and configurations of the districts, they certainly are going to have to live with this. And I generally believe that the people who have to live with the document should be part of the process that creates the document. And
Steve,
so,
can you give us an idea of a few other people who would be, typically part of such a commission, just so we can start thinking about it between now and then?
usually there's no restrictions. I mean, you could have members of the council, but you probably don't want to have members of the council. They're going to be acting on it. They have an interest involved in here. You want to have people who are conscientious, thoughtful folks. You may want to have people that represent different organizations that will have an interest in protecting the representational interests of people throughout the community. You may look geographically around the city and say, we want somebody from the north, the south, the east, the west, however the city is broken up. So it's really a practical judgment.
You want like representatives from different parties as well.
Oh, yes, absolutely. No, you definitely should not. You should not have, you should try like a charter commission not to have a, you need to have a very balanced commission. And so you should have unaffiliated, you should have minority parties, majority party, third parties if you want. You should try to get as much representation, but we'll talk about that as we develop it. But like in New Haven, with a 7-member body, there are severe limitations on, you have both registrars. I'm sorry, this is Hamden. You have both registrars, and then you have 5 electors, and not more than 2 of a majority. So you don't have a majority party on it. So you can only max out the parties at 2. So 4 of the 5 could be representatives of the 2 major parties if you choose, with a 5th member who is unaffiliated or communist or working families party, whatever you may want to put on there as your 5th member. But we can talk about that. Are you okay
with us taking questions now, or is there more that?
Interrupt me and ask questions as you'd like.
Okay, good. Please. It looks there's like a few hands up. So first, Nora, I think your hand
I see.
Up first.
I provoke people.
No, it's good. I appreciate the overview. And you may not have this information yet, and Stuart actually might be the right person to ask this. Do we have a sense of how far off our current districts are, or where we have imbalances in our current districts?
I do not. And I don't know if the comparative data, Stuart may have comparative census data that he's looked at unofficially.
Stuart, if you can answer the question.
I would defer to him. I would defer to Stuart.
If you have information, we'd love to hear from you.
Well, a couple of points. The census data is difficult to deal with because the districts don't follow street lines, and the census data is done by tracts, which tend to be a block, basically. If you look at the map, you'll see several areas where the lines run right through the middle of districts, right through the middle of buildings, including apartment buildings, and things like that. So it's very hard to come up with a good feel for those numbers. Of course, I can get it very easily in terms of number of registered voters, but that's not the measure. So,
but that would be, I mean, I understand that that's not the measure, but just as a general sense, assuming that there's sort of some semi, proportionateness, in terms of registered voters, do you have a sense of what's larger, what's smaller?
Well, yes, in terms of number of registered voters, inner city districts tend to be a little smaller than the others, but I suspect they also house most of the non-citizens as well. So I don't know that that's going to be perfect. This has been an issue that's been kicking around for a while. Of course, it was very difficult to deal with it, but back from the Knopp administration, they tried to look into it. I know. I've seen some of their paperwork on it. I tried to get the MOSHA people interested in it 10 years ago or so, and they were not interested in the least. So it's been around, but these taxing districts restrain things considerably with the four fairly large ones. We tend to try to keep them in one district. You'll see your current system is set up that way. And then one further thing, in general, when we've had state redistricting, of course, the legislature draws the lines, and then we propose precinct lines based on the potential number of voters that would be included to be able to deal with the polling place within that district that can handle them. Some of the places, say the library now, and some of the ones in the inner areas are hard to find enough parking, for instance. District B, currently we have Columbus, which is like 3/4 of the district or more. The current voters at Ely are a very small part. Some of these pieces are not entirely contiguous. It's was an interesting challenge just reading through the descriptions and trying to follow them on a map. I've got a great big map in my office, which allowed me to do that. See areas that were not even correct on the map because the map was too small to notice them. So anyway, that's the problem in coming up with these, but I suspect we certainly have some areas that would be administratively nice to move. District A4, which is basically the Betswood area, votes in where District C does, and if that was an area that needed more, that'd be a good place to start moving them. But as I say, there's apartment buildings, the line runs through them. So I don't know how easily it's going to be to move them. These are taxing district lines that do that.
Can I just thank you? That was
Fine.
very helpful to me, Stuart, Mr. Registrar. But I want to point one thing out. We are not talking about the taxing districts. Before we raise a ruckus in town, they are not affected by this at all.
Yes, but you have to keep them in one district, or it makes it very hard to have. We have to have a separate district for them, so you would require extra precincts, which get into areas of amount of voting equipment that we have and can handle as well.
No, that's an administrative issue. What we're
Yes.
talking about with redistricting are the council districts and the
Yes.
Board of Education districts. Yeah.
Yes, but
Those are the
currently
ones that are-
currently the taxing districts are each, well, the 4 districts are each in one of the 5 council districts. If you want to get away from that, that gets complicated as well. But again, it could be done.
All right, but yeah, and I suppose that's something we'll look at, but I want to make it clear that it's not my proposal that we do anything about reconfiguring the taxing districts that are set up by the
No,
special
I
act.
understand. I understand
Yeah.
that, of course.
Yeah, I just want to make that clear for the record.
Yeah.
I learned
Jalen-
from the chair,
Yeah.
Patsy taught me well about not attacking the taxing districts and let's keep them in place.
Right, but you can't draw a municipal district and lop off a few hundred people from a taxing district, or it requires us to hold an entire polling place for that little thing. So you don't just have your own districts to worry about as part of this process.
No, that's
Lisa,
a good point to make.
Jalen had his hand up.
Yeah, I was gonna say, that's a good point that Stuart made, and I was gonna move to Jalen. I was gonna ask Jalen if he wanted to ask his question now.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart, for bringing up the taxing district. That was one point that I was going to bring up. Because like to Stuart's point, it will, like in District A, A1 and 2, I might mix them up. Those precincts vote for the first taxing district commissioners, and not the other precincts. So if you do move it, it could be an issue. But also with the population, just with population in District A and B with the urban core, I'm pretty sure that if you look at the population is higher, but we do have a lot of the new development that happened. In District A, you got West Avenue with the Waypoint and Avalon. A lot of a lot of apartments. In District B, you have the housing projects, and then you also have a lot of the new development that's happening on South Main and on Day Street. So with the population, I think I wanted to know, how does that correlate with the, like you said, like interest groups, and also having minorities be able to vote for candidates that they want to vote for? Because in like District A and District B, we might have a higher population, but that is where a lot of minorities are. Then we also have the inner city and like the urban core where we have those like interests. So I want to see where that fits in the conversation.
Madam Chair, should I answer?
Yeah, yes, please, Steve. I was going to ask if you could help with that answer.
Yeah, happy. I can't give you a definitive answer at this moment, because the first step is we have to create the commission that will then create those districts. And one of the things, Councilmember Siad, that they will do is they will have public hearings. There will be opportunities for members of the public to appear before the redistricting committee or commission, whatever we're going to call it. And so they will, as part of their due diligence, listen to the voices of people in the community. They will also be working with a group, with a technical expert that I'm going to be recommending that as we're drafting this ordinance, that we should be drafting an RFP to have a technical expert in place, so that when the commission is up and running, they don't have to go out and hire them. They'll be ready to go day one. We don't have a lot of time, so we really need to have the technical expert in place. And so then what the commission is going to have to weigh, council member, is how the district lines will fall, what the relationship they bear, and Stuart raised a really good point, what they bear to other entities in the community, including state legislative districts, state senate districts, the taxing districts. Your precincts are going to have to be probably reconfigured, because you may have overlap. I've seen that in other communities where you have a polling place where you have multiple machines, because you have two assembly districts that happen to fall within a voting district. And so you want to try to avoid those things. And that's why you want your registrars on your redistricting committee to the extent you can. So, but to answer the council member's question, it will be a combination of public intervention, public participation, and then weighing that public comment with the data as the data is analyzed and configured by the entity. When I was on the Board of Alders in the 1980s and early 1990s, it was almost like a hand count. You guys are much luckier that you have the technology that exists today, so that you can manipulate, and I don't mean manipulate in a bad way, but move things around to figure out how can you maximize homogeneous populations? How can you maximize different types of groups that should be together and get the benefit of their population base in the community, all in compliance with Voting Rights Act, and other principles under this. So I hope that answered the question. I can't answer it definitively because we don't have the data.
Yeah, I think you definitely did. I just want to note, and I'll be a stickler on this throughout the process, but I just want to note that like the minority populations historically have they don't come out to public hearings and voice their opinions, and a lot of times we get the same people coming and speaking just because they're not really mobilized. So I will just urge all of us do our due diligence to try to get people out, because those public hearings, a lot of times, I know minority communities, it's hard getting Latinos or African Americans or Haitian Americans to come out to these public hearings. So I'm gonna continue to voice that, but it does answer it. But I do think that those minority groups are ones that are vulnerable, and we want to make sure that we think of their interests as well.
100%.
If I may,
That point.
if I
And
may
then the
just,
next person, oh, I'm sorry.
if
Do
I
you
may
have
just,
another point you want to make, Steve, or otherwise should I let Josh ask the next question?
if I can wait 1 minute for Josh, I just want to
Sure.
answer the council member's point, because I think it's a point well taken. When the commission is formed, one of the things the commission can and should do especially in this post-pandemic era, is, they're probably going to do a lot of meetings like we're doing tonight. But I think that if they can physically go out into areas of town to be closer to people, to try to get public input in communities that the council member is talking about, they should do that. And I think it's up to you as members of the council to encourage the commission or the committee to engage in that kind of outreach. It's pretty critical.
I agree with you, Jalen. We definitely take that, under advisement and make sure we get out to the communities. Josh, you've had your hand up for a long time.
Thank you. I just wanted to I just wanted to get a sense of the scheduling, because this is a lot that you're trying to do. There are a lot of steps, and you're basically saying that an RFP needs to go out. We need to interview and select someone. There needs to be public hearings. The person needs to review all the data and whatever, and have a finished product basically in a year.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's a
and by
very
the way,
tight schedule.
You have to pick a commission and confirm. And are they council confirmable? I would imagine they are.
You can decide that. You're going to be creating the ordinance, so
Okay.
they could be presumably you'd want them council confirmable.
So I guess my question is, do you have a specific schedule? Because
I do not. We haven't formed. Yeah,
because if it's some
this meeting came a little
thing,
earlier than I expected. I do not have a schedule. I am going to talk to the Secretary of
I'm
State's
surprised
office.
you're saying it came earlier than I expected, because it actually seems like we're like picking up, pretty late in the game here. Because if we have to do all this in a year,
we didn't have a
But
new
we had
council
to,
until a few weeks
pass it
ago.
at the election. So
of course, no, I'm just saying it's a very tight timeline.
Oh no! I
So-
agree. I'm just saying that I thought there was a meeting next week, and then I was asked to come to this meeting, which I'm thrilled to be here, because I think this is really critical, and I think you're doing the right thing. But I do not. I will sit down with the Secretary of State's office to figure out the timing, because one of the things I'm concerned about, I don't want to invite litigation, is that if we end up with litigation, it could throw everything off completely. Now,
Yeah.
and I don't want to say this, but I will say this: we're aiming for 2025, but if we get pushed off, or we find it's unrealistic, or we find that it's more difficult, we could probably put it off. You've put it off since 1962. You could probably put it off for 2 more years. But the point is, I think we should really try to do it, and that's why aggressively I would like to see us get a commission together as soon as possible. My hope would be for your meeting in January, and I'll have a better sense of it after we meet next week, that I can have before you, and I do want to talk to Stuart and other people in the city, and to Lisa as the chair of the committee, to try to come up with different concepts on what a commission could look like, so that we can do everything we can to get this thing out of committee and before your full body and approved as early as possible, late winter, the beginning of spring, sometime in February or March maybe, more realistically. And if we get the ordinance in place in March, I'm telling you that in the same way that I'm going to suggest that you start to think about hiring a firm, that you should start thinking about, once we get a sense of how many people are going to be on this commission, council leadership should be thinking about who we might want to have on the commission, and get it moving as quickly as possible.
Yeah,
Just
no,
for
thank
this,
you.
let me
It's,
just give like a kind of a 30,000 foot, Steve, because we have some new members of our committee who may or may not know how ordinances work. So likely what we'd like to do is have a good first draft for our next committee meeting. And if it's really in pretty good shape, and this is be something that we'll share with the committee early on, so that you can come to the meeting prepared. It has to go to public hearing, and then it gets voted to council. So there's almost in no world that it gets to Common Council before March, if we're doing everything right. But if we do get it to March, that I can see how that's helpful. Steve, I have one question.
When's your January meeting, Madam Chair?
It's the 3rd Tuesday in January. So that's how that
January
operates.
16th, Steve.
Yeah.
Thank you.
One question I have is and
Heather,
Can
Lisa,
I ask
Heather,
a
Heather.
clarification question though? So when you're redistricting, actually 2 questions. Is a taxing district a community of interest? Would that be kind of something that would be part of that scope is my first question. My second question would be, are you looking at the balancing the census or balancing the voters? Those are my two questions.
Well, the census data will tell you who the voters are and what the demographics are of the voters.
But not necessarily if you have a lot of not legal.
Well, that would have to be taken into the counted for voting purposes. They're counted for census purposes, but you would
So we're
imagine
using the census numbers or the registered voters?
you work off the census numbers. You look
Okay.
at the statistical data that is generated by the census in order to get a sense of what the population consists of. And I don't know the answer. I will tell you on how you disregard non-voters, non-citizens, but I'm sure there's a methodology for that. I don't know the answer definitively for you on that.
But typically you would not want to disregard them. You want to create a district that includes them, but you don't want to include enough of them that there aren't enough voters in that district, I assume.
Yeah, I think the objective is to have a district that is reflective of the populations, but I do not know the answer. In fact, I have not seen that in the literature I was reading in prep for this meeting. I did not see anything on that, but that's a great question, and I'll take a look at that.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Or you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just to say, I believe this has been litigated, Steve, and I'll try to find it, but I am 99% certain that it includes the residents regardless of their citizenship status as the basis.
Right,
So-
well, I'll look at that. I do not have that.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure I read. I'll try to see if I can find it for you.
I believe that that's right too.
But you also don't want to have to set up voting booths in an area where you have a very low voter turnout, right? I mean, I guess that was my thinking along those lines.
I think you have to
As far
represent
as
the
Stuart
population.
says.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think the population has to be represented by voting districts, not polling places.
And I think to Stuart's point, like in District A, we have A4, where there's like a very low turnout. They're an important part of District A, but there's a very low turnout. Like I think maybe 100 votes at the general election. So that part we do have in the part of Nathan Hell. So we have a separate booth at Nathan Hell, but it's very low turnout. In primaries, sometimes like 20, 30 people.
But if I might answer that,
Yes, thanks.
that's a very tiny district. The problem is that District A includes the people over by Kendall, but then extends all the way to Bettswood with the taxing district in the middle. And so traditionally they didn't send the people from Bettswood all the way to Kendall, which is why they had their own district. It's expensive for us to do that, but whatever you guys end up deciding, we'll just have to do it. But we do try to balance these precincts to be administratively useful, because that's the precinct, not the district. The number of precincts within a district is more in the area we've been working in. And one last thing, none of the municipal lines relate to the state lines. So we don't really need to worry about and they change those every 10 years anyway.
So does the redistricting correlate with the census, when the census comes out, or is it, like
Yes.
6 years later? Okay.
Yes, it's done the year after the census comes out, but the legislature decides on their legislative districts, and then we chop them up into appropriate precincts and present that plan to the council. And of course, we factor in that there's got to be a place you can hold voting in that district if possible.
And generally, when you do it in accordance with the census, it's usually done at the beginning of the decade. We're not doing it at the beginning of the decade. The legislature goes first, then the local governments go thereafter to try to fit in as much as they can into the new assembly districts. And that's usually an objective. But obviously, they're already set, so you'll have a sense of what they are. The fact is, it does base it on population. I will take a look at those cases as well. So I think it really is the census data that is driving this.
So Steve, I have one question about that process. So if it seems like this is something that we shouldn't ignore every, 50 years or so, we should do it more frequently. So is this something that we would do also kind of based on census data? So you just said that the state legislature goes first. So would if we could put in our ordinance that within a period of time after the state legislature picks their districts, we do ours again? Is that something we
Yes,
should
it normally works off of the legislative redistricting. So it would have been done a year ago.
Yeah.
You would have, so that it would have been in effect. It would have been, New Haven's was in effect for this election. They followed up on the legislative redistricting, and they had theirs. Their districting took place in November. So we'll be 2 years behind the 8 ball in the future. You should do it in tandem with the legislative reapportionment.
So
Great.
does that
One last
stay an
question.
ordinance, or is that something that becomes part of the charter?
It would, the charter is silent on it, except that you have to do it. There's an ordinance in the state that drives the process. I don't know that it specifically says when the local governments are supposed to do it, but it's been the custom in the state to follow up on that within a year after the legislative lines are drawn, because it's more convenient and economical for your registrars to have all the district lines drawn around the same time, so that they don't have to do it periodically. They can live with it for a decade.
So Jalen, I see your hand, but just to follow up on my question that I was just following up on. So that's something we can choose to put in the ordinance ourselves and make it standard so that that's set
Correct.
up. That's what
Yeah.
the point that I was trying to
Yeah.
make. Great.
Yeah, I
Jalen,
want to make sure that what we do is we comply completely with the state standards, with the Secretary of State's office. I will sit down with them as I have done for the other charter provisions that I've drafted, and just sit down with them and make sure that we are totally in, going according to Hoyle in that
and I
regard.
presume, just to also follow up on my question, which is that you probably have a couple of draft ordinances that other jurisdictions have used that you like, that you're going to share with us, and we'll sort
Yeah,
through.
they're not ordinances, they are charter provisions, because most of these are done by charter. We put it off because we weren't sure how controversial or difficult it would have been, and so we wanted to at least get the principle into the charter and then adopt an ordinance. So I will, for our meeting next week, and I will send out to all the members of the committee 3 or 4 or 5 different types of reapportionment processes I've seen throughout the state in the big cities.
That'd be great. Jalen, I'm sorry to have you wait for my question to be answered.
No problem. And I think that I'm happy that we're going through this process, and now we have to. But is there a possibility that we go through this process and the committee could say that, hey, the districts are working and there is no change, or does there have to be a change?
If it's determined that your current districts do not meet one person, one vote standards, do not comply with the Voting Rights Act, you have to change your districts. If the current districts are in compliance with all of those things, and have been since 1962, then you don't have to change anything. But it'd be hard to imagine that the Norwalk of 1962 is the Norwalk of 2024. So the answer is you do have to change it in all probability.
Sure. Any other questions for Steve? Or Steve, we interrupted your process for these questions. Is there more to your presentation that you'd like to cover?
I think that we went through most of what I was planning on doing. Your questions put me in that place. I talked about the next thing I was going to discuss was having a firm that would, or a person, a statistician, data analyst, whatever we want to call them, that would be working with you. I was going to go over briefly, I kind of did it already, processes in Hamden, New Haven, Bridgeport. I'll take a look at Stanford's as well, and Norwalk. Hartford does not have redistricting because they have an at-large system, which is astonishing. It feels like, it's quite astonishing that no one's ever challenged it politically. Even Waterbury finally went from at-large to a district system about 8 years ago. So Hartford stands alone among the big cities as having an at-large system, which is quite amazing. I've been through 4 charter revisions, and we've had mayors knock it down in every one of the charters. So we'll talk about why that is the case some other time. But it's yeah, I think I've covered most everything that we have here. What I will try to do, we have a meeting next Wednesday. I will try at the very least to have a draft for the 16th, or give you 2 or 3 different concepts for the 16th. You know, and so that we can move quickly thereafter to try to tighten it up, because I don't want to be presumptuous and say I think this is better than that. What I may want to show you is these are the steps in the process, which I think will be relatively consistent. The question is, how do you want to configure this? How many people do you want to have on the charter? How many people you want to have on the reapportionment committee or commission? Those types of things will be the things you're going to need to answer. How do you resolve an impasse? Different cities have different approaches to impasse resolution. The real objective is to end up with a package that will be approved by you, by the council. It's ultimately a council matter. It's like charter revision in that regard. The mayor does not have a big role in this. It's really governed by the legislative body has to make the final approval on the districts, and so it's going to be a tough process, and you're going to be going through it for the first time. It's going to be the first in multiple generations, an opportunity to do this, but it's achievable. It is enormously ambitious, as Councilmember Goldstein pointed out a few moments ago, and not impossible, but very ambitious. And everybody, that commission is going to have to work real hard. They're going to have to probably meet multiple nights a week to get this done in a timely way.
And so for the committee, I just want to let you know that this committee is a little bit different than some other committees because we have homework and we have deadlines on our homework. So we will be sharing this information as soon as we get it from Steve, and it'll take, it does take some hours to prepare yourself for these types of meetings, because as you can see, it's pretty lively. And this will be very quick process if we're really going to try to get this done by March, or certainly by the latest early April.
What I'll do, with the permission of the chair, is I know we're meeting next week. I will try, I'm traveling this weekend. Once I settle in my other home, I will send out to the committee, or to the clerk, and have the clerk distribute to the committee the 5 or 6 different plans that are in charters around the state, so you can get an early look at that. If I can do it before I leave on Friday, I will try to do that as well. That will simply show you how those cities do it, so that when and if you're comfortable, we've got to be careful with FOIA about debating privately, but if you want at some point to let me know, or let the chair know what the direction you want to take, she could then let me know the direction you want to take. And the more we can get that done, then the more likely it is I could have a draft for you for the meeting in January.
That'd be great. Steve, I think the way we usually handle things is everything goes through Brian. So if you would pass it to Brian, Brian can share it
Brian,
with the
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, Brian's our staff person. We'll take Stuart off the hook on that. And then generally speaking, I spoke to some of my committee members. I tend to call people one-on-one, because it's really hard to draft an ordinance or anything else by committee on TV as we do here. So I like to, get a good sense from each of my committee members what they're thinking. So I'll be
Lisa,
reaching out.
I can get it out if it's Friday. I'm out all next week.
Yeah.
All right, I will try to get, if I can, you're here on Friday, Brian?
Yeah, I'll be responding
I
through
will,
Friday
between
evening.
tomorrow and Thursday, I'm trying to get a bunch of things done. I'm on the road Friday. I will try to get them out to you tomorrow or Thursday, so you can get them out to everybody. And then we can move from there, and I'll be meeting with Lisa next week.
Okay, great.
And I appreciate everybody's time over the holidays. I realize that people would prefer not to be reading this dense material, but we got a job to do. So thank you, everybody. Any further questions for Steve before we call for a motion to adjourn? Everybody's good?
No, Steve, you got to get that sleigh ready for Christmas.
My grandmother would have preferred to call me Rabbi Mednick as opposed to Santa Mednick. But,
I know, but you got the hair for it, so you got the part.
Let me tell you, I can't tell you the number of times I walk down the street where say, "Hey, Santa Claus, how are you?"
And you're like,
how many
"Shalom."
times I go, "Ho, ho, ho."
I would
And,
never do that to him. That's just so unfair.
now
Anyway.
it used to be Jerry Garcia, so in January I'll be back to Jerry Garcia for the holiday season. That's why you don't see me wearing red.
Yes, don't avoid the red at all
I
costs.
avoid the red.
Yeah.
Well, thank you,
though.
everybody. Thank
Merry
you for-
Christmas, everybody.
Yeah,
Happy
and
holidays.
happy holidays,
holidays,
Happy New
everybody.
Year. So I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
You got it. Thank you, Nora. Thank
Thanks,
you,
everybody.
Everybody have a great
Bye-bye.
holiday.
Good
Talking to
night.
you.
Thank you.
Everyone,
You all
thank you.
too.
Hi, everybody.
Bye.
Good night.
Alrighty. Good night.